For those of you who are new to the channel, it's no secret that I love the Gex series. It's something that's come to influence my entire life, it feels like. This series was my Mario, it was my Sonic, it was my Crash. It influenced my humor and my style as a creator. And up until now, beyond just proving my inability to count, I've covered both the original Gex, a 2D platformer slash the killer app of the failed 3DO that, while flawed, was still quite enjoyable, and its sequel, Gex Enter the Gecko. The series jumped to 3D, how it took influence from Mario 64 and made one of the greatest 3D platformers of its generation following its formula. And now, friends, it's finally time. After the long wait, all the delays, all the memes, all the callbacks, all the references to the fact I didn't get it done, I'm finally doing it. I'm finally reviewing Gex Deep Pocket Gecko on Gameboy Color. Gex 3 Deep Pocket Gecko is a 2D platformer developed for the Game Boy Color and released November 15th, 1999 in North America, with a PAL release later in 2000, and is Gex's last major outing as a character as of the time of this video coming out. It's a real return to form. You know, it's really, really cool. The third entry in the Gex series went back to 2D from 3D. Really a bold choice here. All jokes aside, Deep Pocket Gecko combines elements of both the 2D and 3D Gex games into a more open-ended platforming experience, and it works pretty decently some of the time. Although honestly, the video showing your goal is far less helpful in a 2D space, and overall I can best describe the game as confusing. With level design that makes me want to pull my hair out and then just stuff it in my ears so I don't have to listen to the music. Gex actually controls pretty decent here, and you have a handful of levels to choose from, with the end goal being defeating Rez and saving the day. The levels here take a more open-ended approach than any of the other 2D games in the series, which sadly leads to getting super lost really often. And sadly on top of this, the bosses aren't much better as they're super underwhelming. Like just look at Rez. He looks jacked. He's been killing that 5x5. You can grate cheese on his abs. But he just jumps around like a jackass. And oh, who am I kidding? I know what you're here for, so let's just cut the charade and get right to it. Yeah, let's do it. Gex 3 Deep Cover Gecko on PS1 and also N64, but we'll get to that later. Oh, and before I get going on that, if you want some final thoughts on Deep Pocket, it's okay. It's a decent game for a handheld at the time, but it's a little bit lacking in content and pretty frustrating. If you're a fan of the series, it might be worth playing, but in my opinion, unless you are a fan of this series, you might not want to check it out. If Gex Enter the Gecko is your cool uncle who watches too much TV and keeps making you laugh at Thanksgiving dinner with his weird references, then Gex 3 Deep Cover Gecko is that same uncle who's now 5 deep and down bad. It can be felt through this entire game, and it's the biggest thing separating these two entries. Actually, if you think about it, this series is actually this weird time capsule or time machine, with Gex becoming more and more edgy and vulgar as the decade went on. It's kinda neat. Gex 3 was released March 23rd and April 10th, 1999 in North America and Europe respectively, with N64 versions coming out 6 months later in North America and over a bloody year in Europe. It's a continuation of Gex Enter the Gecko, sharing a lot of DNA with that game, including the game engine, which means all the faults that come with that are here too, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. No Japanese version this time. Gex just wasn't that popular in Japan anyway, and I'm sure with all the translations involved, it might just be a nightmare to continue doing them. This time around, Rez has returned from that whole being dead thing from the last game and decides to get his revenge by kidnapping Gex's love interest, Agent Extra, played by a Baywatch actress and former Playboy model Marcine Andrada, and causing some havoc on the media dimension. Gex goes back on the TV once again to save the day, get the lady, and push the absolute limits on what a teen-rated game can get away with. Look, I gotta address this now. This game needs to touch grass, and it permeates through everything here. Ranging from advertisements showing Gex covering extras being put in gaming magazines at the time, Gex flirting with Extra during cutscenes to an extreme that boils down to, "Hey, you want some soul?" Hell, spoiler alert, this Gex in tail again this time around, so look forward to seeing that joke reused. It all comes together to create this weird transition of character, where in the last game he was more of a James Bond referencing Austin Powers, and instead we flip it this time around, and he's way more Austin Powers mocking James Bond. It leads to some awkward moments unless you're into Gecko and human relations, and because the lines are more vulgar in general, I think some of Gex's comments this time around have aged a lot worse than just being an old movie reference or something. I found that when I was playing this game, the lines really started grating on me a bit too. It feels like there's a lot less variety here, and these lines are a lot more on the nose than before. The Western level in particular is really bad for this. If I have to hear this asshole say rawhide one more time, I'm gonna make a Western of my own. As for voices, Dana Gould reprises his role as Gex once again in North America, with Europe getting Danny John Jules. And let's see what he's up to these days. Yep, very good, carrying on. This time around we have 11 levels with 3 bosses and 9 bonus or secret levels, compared to the last game's 15 levels with 4 bosses and 12 bonus and secret levels. That said, we don't get any repeats here compared to Enter the Gecko, where we saw some themes appear more than once. Levels this time around include a Christmas level, a mystery-themed level, Egypt, war, Western, pirate, mythology, fairy tales, a joke, mafia, and superhero-themed levels. Beyond the remotes, we also have some other items to collect this time around. We have fly coins, get 50 for an extra life, and 100 in a stage to get an extra remote. This is actually a huge downgrade in my opinion from last time. First off, back in Enter the Gecko, each level had its own form of coins, and had 3 of them at that, and they're really sorely missed here. It really takes away such a cool little detail that really only Gex was doing at the time, and I really appreciated it a lot. The other issue is that this time there's only 100 coins for each level, meaning you have to really scrape around and make sure not to miss anything. It can become incredibly obnoxious, honestly, to be searching around for that last 1 or 2 coins you missed, with some being hidden in downright stupid places. After this, we also have the paw coins. 25 gives you a permanent health upgrade, and there's 100 in the game to collect to upgrade your health. So by the end, if you collect them all, you get up to 8 hits before biting it. Finally, you have bonus coins, which are used to access special levels, which once complete will grant you access to using the Gex Vault, allowing you to activate some cheats. All of these are actually the developers' attempts to help give more incentive to explore, using these collectibles that actually mean something. In theory, this would give a huge reason to explore different areas off the beaten path and levels. However, in practice, it's nice to have, but I feel like these levels overall are just too much of a pain to navigate to make these anything less than a mild inconvenience. I also gotta say, nothing really stuck with me as much as last time, or even with Gex 1. Like, maybe holiday broadcasting left a bit of an impact? It seems to be the level this game really pushes the most. But outside of that, none of these levels are anything to really write home about over the levels in the last game, in my opinion. Hell, I'd argue some of these levels have a lot of missed potential. The anime level in particular is super bad for this, just totally missing the mark on what anime even is. With the developer seemingly calling it a day with just having Gex in a mech-looking suit and throwing in some random references that are sort of sci-fi with a sprinkling of George Jetson's colon. It's a shame too, there's so much potential with an idea as broad as anime. Let me see Gex go Super Saiyan, damn it. Just having like a single enemy that's a schoolgirl doesn't make something anime, it just sort of comes off as lazy. And this seems to bleed into a couple other places too. It really throws me off even now why, for example, the Western station has no skybox. It's just really weird. While we're at it, I also have to question level order a bit. In the final game we start off with holiday broadcasting, but I get this small feeling we were supposed to start with the Army Channel instead. The Army Channel is very basic compared to the other levels, but it has very fun but simple gimmicks. With Alfred, Gex's butler, far more present guiding you around the honestly well-contained area that does a good job being easy to navigate at the start of the game. Meanwhile, holiday broadcasting is a bit more difficult. It feels more like a second level in a lot of ways. Less Alfred, some trickier platforming, but still relatively safe. Overall, just on top of it, something feels off here. It's hard to describe. Some levels just, they don't play to Gex's strengths at all. The camera got neutered pretty heavily in this game to try and make a jack-of-all-trades option, and it's created the situation where tight spaces are a shit show for Gex to get around in. And let's be real here, even in Enter the Gecko, things getting too tight were already a huge problem. He just doesn't control well enough to pull it off. And Enter the Gecko's level design generally masterfully ensured that that was accounted for, giving Gex large, broad spaces to move around in, and when he had to platform, the platforms were generally not very tight, making this feel like it wasn't really an issue. However, here in Gex 3, using the exact same controls, with Gex feeling exactly the same as he did previously, the levels almost seemingly aren't designed with as much care. In particular, I gotta bring up the Mythology Network, because it's really bad for this. It is painful to navigate this level compared to any other. And while I'm at it, I should probably shout out Fairy Tail TV for the high blood pressure diagnosis. Both have pretty similar issues. Gex just isn't made for some of what is being asked here. He doesn't have the range of movement, so it can be needlessly frustrating making these tight jumps in these small areas. Honestly, overall, I really dislike the change of philosophy level designs seem to have here. When Gex 3 plays to Gex's limitation and skill set, it's honestly just as much fun as its precursor, but it's just not always happening here. Now, that's not to say that challenge is necessarily bad. I love Rhizopolis and Enter the Gecko, and it is a challenging level, but is also very well designed around the character in my opinion, and that just doesn't happen as much in Gex 3. I also think mission quality overall has actually gone down a bit, ranging from the normal missions just being a bit too convoluted for no real reason at times. Seriously, on Mystery TV, how was I supposed to know about becoming a vampire here without a walkthrough? To the bosses just being such a letdown from the previous title. This time around we have 3 bosses. First off is Rock Hard, a 90s wrestling themed boss, which should be my jam. I love wrestling. But this sack of crap's a total jabroni, brother. After that we get the Brain of Oz, who was actually repurposed from Enter the Gecko. He's not very good, but it's still neat that they went back to the old design and found a place for it, because it is a cool design. It's just a shame that the boss itself is really, really awful. And then Rez, who's such a letdown after Enter the Gecko gave us one of the best boss fights of all time. Like, it's so simple, and it's a shame too because his design is kinda rad in this fight. Meanwhile, once again, I keep looking back to the previous game and his bosses, and sure, none of them were necessarily crazy until Rez, which was freaking sick. Dude, I could write an entire video on why that boss is incredible. But each are really enjoyable battles that stick out to me. Here, however, I find these bosses more of a chore than a challenge of my skills at that point. Sure, let's be real here, Mushu Pork got beat so bad that he decided to become a subway conductor after Enter the Gecko, but he's still far more memorable than Rock Hard over here. That said, on the flip side, I actually think this game does a far better job with theming compared to its predecessor. The music having leitmotifs of each other is a super nice touch, even if I prefer the Enter the Gecko soundtrack. Every area is unique with no main level having the same theme. The game holds up incredibly well visually, even more so than Enter the Gecko in my opinion, and it pushes the PlayStation to its absolute limits, and the N64 beyond. The hub is way more interesting here, despite being a nightmare to navigate in the name of that. And Gex 3 actually gets way more creative with its power-ups, namely the handful of different abilities that give Gex varying amounts of flight, the Ice Breath, and the new Acid Breath. Why is the Acid Breath TV green like the health one? And on top of it, the good levels here are actually really well done. Like, I love holiday broadcasting, the dumb Santa fight where you destroy Christmas 5 ever, or the skateboard section where you beat up the stupid elves. I like how Gex 3 manages to have a winter level that's actually enjoyable, which so many other games around it really fail to do. I really enjoy Mystery TV despite one of its missions being pants on head stupid. I like the Army channel a lot too. All of these levels do a fantastic job playing to Gex's abilities, and I never found myself getting annoyed playing through these levels with the exception of that one Mystery TV mission. They all have fun gimmicks that really show the best of what this game has to offer, and really encourages you to revisit and explore these areas in their entirety, something heavily lacking in some other levels. I really found myself having the most fun here, where the gimmicks didn't really get in the way of things like, for example, the Western Channel having to ride a donkey around, and levels like Fairy Tale TV and the Mythology Network that end up being just too linear and hard to get around to where they're almost a slog to explore through. On top of the regular levels, you also get a handful of bonus missions here, and they're sprinkled throughout the game. Some having specific requirements and generally feature Gex working with an ally to complete a task in a time limit, with an additional 4 TVs hidden throughout the world, some of which are unique per version, with both getting a water level and a lifeguard themed level, the PS1 getting a firefighter themed level as well as a level themed after another Crystal Dynamics game, Akuji the Heartless, and the N64 getting a double, having a pirate themed bonus level, and then after that it would also get an Indiana Jones themed level. The reason I bring this up is that your objective in this mission is to collect a Crystal Skull, meaning that Gex predicted Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull almost 10 years before its release. After the final but a little bit disappointing fight with Rez, you save Agent Extra, wonder why they reused the Channel Z logo from Enter the Gecko, learn about another impending mystery, and one more thing. I think I'm forgetting something. Yeah! Alfred tells us Gex and Extra go on a cruise together, and Alfred takes a well-earned vacation, and Gex will be back to— Oh, no, that's the N64 version. Alright!
It's tail time!
At its best, Gex 3 is an incredible game. Better than Enter the Gecko really, with improvements to things like the hub world, its visuals and theming, but it falls so short in other areas. This game feels incredibly rushed, that the grand ideas here were just half-baked, and it leads to Gex's flaws as a character in terms of playability sticking out far more. Especially realizing that now we're in 1999, where at this point we have a lot more 3D platformers coming out that just totally rock and outclass everything this game is trying to accomplish. Confusing level design, the hub world being interesting but not making sense lore-wise, like, this is the Gex cave. Why can't we just go to every level lore-wise? Like, did Gex just lose his keys? Did Rez just do some stuff and we were never told? I like to think it's the former, attributed to lack of pockets. I still like this game, it's still enjoyable, it's still Gex, and I've played through this game multiple times now like Enter the Gecko before it, and in that sense, players did agree. Gex 3 is the best-selling game in the series, matching up with games like Crash 3 and beating out the Spyro games and Sonic Adventure by a mile. But at the end of the day, it feels like something's up here. What happened? Why do I get this feeling this game was a little bit rushed? Well, it's no secret that it just was. It was heavily rushed, in fact. It's part of why there's a lot of Enter the Gecko leftovers kicking around even in the final release. There were a lot of cuts and issues in the development of Gex 3. Multiple full levels were removed, some basically completed already, as proven by a prototype that also has a lot of content that would be changed or removed from December 1998. That's pretty close to when this game would be coming out. This is cutting it really down to the wire on when you would have to go to print to give time to get this game shipped out. Some levels would end up dramatically changed too between versions, with the far later N64 release having the Mythology Network entirely reworked in particular to play to Gex's strengths better, while substantially lowering the difficulty of the stage. I legitimately think, in this case, the crunch took its toll on the final product in the end, and it's a shame too, because I think with another few months, it could have been an even better experience, and been a stepping stone on a path to continuing the series. That said, the devs' hands were tied. Eidos and Crystal Dynamics went all in with advertising for the game. It had to be done on time. And I get the feeling Eidos wasn't really feeling as Gexy as the community was. Hear me out for a sec. Maybe get that tinfoil hat on too. Gex 3 was coming out around the time the full scope of the Crystal Dynamics and Eidos merger started to actually affect the lineup. It really couldn't be delayed. Too much money and effort went into it by this point, and Eidos and Crystal Dynamics likely just wanted it out, leading to a partially unfinished game being released. Gex 3 is missing a lot of content, both that was for the PlayStation and N64 releases for the game that were just never finished, or finished and weren't implemented, that likely easily could have been finished with even a little bit more time. Merchandise that could have hit store shelves became pre-order bonuses. Some things like this yo-yo lost the time if anyone ever got one. Plushies given out only if you pre-ordered from Eidos themselves. An entire figure line scrapped, a snowboard that no one can find. This game is weirdly surrounded by mystery. I think we're in a situation where there was an acquisition of Crystal Dynamics, but it had nothing to do with Gex. I don't think Eidos actually knew what to do with the character. They were a company that mainly specialized in more realistic games like Tomb Raider and Thief at this time, and I think that they really just had no clue what to do with this character and series going forward. I think in the end, this ended up being the last major Gex game, not because he would be a bad fit for a new era. In fact, I think going into the 2000s, he would have fit in really well if they did a good job adapting him, or a lack of quality or effort. I think Gex was just kind of sacrificed. After Gex 3 came out, this era of the company was over. There was no more Pandemonium, no more Gex, there wasn't a sequel to Akuji the Heartless. I think Eidos really just bought Crystal Dynamics for Legacy of Kain. And I have some proof to back it up. Gex would be removed from Eidos' lineup merely 6 months after Gex 3 released. Shortly after, Soul Reaver hit the scene, and he was soon gone from all promotional material. It was like he never existed in a lot of ways. It was like Gex was assassinated. The series, I mean, not the Gecko. He's selling insurance these days. A real Spike Dudley becomes real estate agent story. Really brings a tear to my eye. I've never really seen a company downright erase part of its legacy like this. I guess Eidos was so focused on another legacy, they just didn't really care. As time would go on, at best, Gex would become this joke in the gaming community, bordering aristocratic, with online personalities taking cracks at the series and Gex himself, trying to get a quick laugh off the quick-talking Gecko that sold millions, treating him as just some other reject in a sea of mediocrity like Bubsy 3D or the worst of the Sonic franchise had to offer. And it would kind of stay like this for over 20 years, with a couple leaks here and there showing concept art of a scrap Gex 4, and a couple other things here and there, and then we hit 2022. And I guess validation for my lazy ass delaying this video so much. In 2022, we got this huge Gex resurgence, if you could call it that, with a scrap prototype of another Gex 4 that had been pitched, leaking on April 1st of all days, showing off Gex Jr. On top of it, Gex would get brought back from the back of the shed he was left at all those years ago too, with Crystal Dynamics featuring him as part of their 30th year anniversary logos, and on their Twitter bio. And on top of it, we're even getting a Crystal Dynamics documentary in October that is probably both going to super update this video and make that bonus video even more crunchy than it already is. Ooh, stay tuned for that. It's small stuff, but it's wild to see these things really turn around for the series after so long and finally be re-embraced. Can't Get it? Because there's some basic group on them. As for Gex 3, it'll forever be this unique final note on this chapter for the character. One that managed to define almost every step of the 90s, and through it all has proven to be a case study of how the industry changed as the decade went on. Gex 1 almost lost in the sea of consoles at its time, providing a unique 2D mascot platformer, evolving to catch the wave of a brand new genre in 3D platformers, before upping the edginess and closing the 90s out, attempting to take on the attitude of the world around it, as things in the background seemingly became more corporate. It's been really interesting looking into this series, and if you haven't given them a shot before, you should really play any of these games in my opinion. Despite my criticism, I do still really enjoy this game, and I have a deep love for this series. Once again, as always, I feel like I should thank the Hurt Gex Discord community, because without y'all, I'm sure a lot of this information on the series would just be lost to time, and honestly, you kind of keep the character alive in some ways. It's kind of rad. The dedication to this series is always astonishing to me, and I freaking love it. And I freaking love seeing my favorite character keep evolving in this new world. So, yeah. Thanks, guys. And thank you, dear viewer, for watching. Soon, old friend. Very soon.